Can I just ask you if I can do like a quick audio test?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
can you hear me right now? Can you hear me right now, or is it?
yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Oh, it's a little quiet now.
A little quiet. Got it. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'll be back. I'm here. Okay, good. Let's go.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Welcome to another AMA here on the Polygon Discord. Today we have a really special guest. We have Daniele Pinna. He's the head of research and I'm sorry, what does the I stand for in
Investment.
research and investment at OVEX. Awesome. So super excited to have you here and really excited to learn more about the OVEX protocol. But before we dive into that, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone? Let us know who you are, what's your backstory, what were you doing before crypto, and like what got you into the space?
Yeah, well, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. Before my backstory, my origin story. So before coming into crypto full time, I was a computational physicist. I had been for a decade, I would say. Got Went to grad school in the United States, in New York, and then did a bunch of postdocs around Europe. None of it had anything to do with crypto, at least on at face value. I've been in crypto. In the meantime, crypto has basically been a hobby of mine for many, many, many years now. I'd like to think of myself as a multi-cycle veteran. And Yeah, but over time, I just kind of got a uh, crypto started crypto the hobby started taking up more and more of my time, to the point where I went through multiple emotional stages of initially feeling guilty for maybe concentrating less than I should have on my full-time job, to hey, maybe I should turn this into a profession. And around the same time that I was coming to this realization, I met our founder, the OVIX founder, Gary Kublikov, by chance, complete chance encounter. And that got me, I guess, into the circuit, if you will. I pretty soon started working full time in crypto, and that's where I am today.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's really relatable for me. Well, let's jump into OVEX. You met Gary, and Gary is one of the co-founders of OVEX, correct? Like, how I don't know, could you just like walk us through like the whole OVEX development journey since you started there, and like what is OVEX?
Right. So I joined that OVIX had already been conceived. So at the core, OVIX is a compound fork. The tokenomic model for it, at the origin, the idea was to basically take compound, fork it, bring it to Polygon, and introduce V tokenomics for as a core tokenomic model for the platform. So imagine like making a Franken protocol of compound and curve. This was like the idea at the very beginning, especially because it was very important to Polygon to have an in-house born and bred lending market protocol, as opposed to being at the whims of mercenary protocols like Aave, for example, which jump from chain to chain. And we thought, okay, well, it's going to be quite a competition and a steep climb to compete in this space, but our two co-founders thought, yeah, let's give it a shot. Let's go for it. Our co-founders, the CTO and Gary, and the CTO Hossam, previously had worked in fintech already. They built like two different fintech companies. They felt like it was time to try their hand at doing exactly the same thing, but in crypto, in Web3. And I joined in soon afterwards. So when I joined in, basically the beta of the protocol was built. The question at that point was kind of like fine tuning it when I first came in. Namely, how do you choose protocol parameters? How do you optimize for them? How do you assess and manage risk in this kind of in a protocol such as this? You can't, you can start off a project by forking it and following best practices, but at some point A, you have to find an edge, and B, you have to be really, really in control of what you're building. And that's when I got looped in because so I met Gary, and he sat me down and he explained to me like what kind of problems they were running into. At the time, the two main ones were um, being like quantifying the kind of risks that users take on lending market protocols, both from a point of view of offering users a more transparent view of the kind of risks that they take on lending markets, and two, to have a protocol-wide risk assessment framework. And so this was the first problem, and the second problem was that all protocols were effectively effectively using static borrow rate curves that were solely a function of the utilization rate and weren't very flexible and adaptable to evolving market conditions. So a typical problem in the middle of a bull market was that we had all these Ponzinomic protocols that would come out, and they would ask you to stake tokens on their protocol. In exchange, they would pay you some protocol token X with insanely high yields. And what would happen is that on lending markets, users would start borrowing whatever asset they were being asked to stake, and they would be okay with paying whatever borrow rate for it because they were getting paid a Ponzinomic yield on the other side. And this is a problem for lending markets because the way trustless lending markets operate is that when lenders deposit tokens, and these tokens effectively are lent out, while it is true that effectively the loans are over collateralized, the lent out tokens, there's no way for the lenders to like forcefully recollect lent out tokens. So if you are a lender on a lending market and you want to withdraw your deposits, you can only withdraw the deposits if there's a buffer of assets which aren't being lent out. So for example, you're a big whale, you deposited 100 ETH as collateral on the lending market, and the rest of the lending market is doing whatever, but let's imagine you're the only person depositing 100 ETH on this particular hypothetical lending market, and everybody else in the lending market starts borrowing ETH. You're getting paid a nice yield. That's great. That's all wonderful. But let's say at some point you want to withdraw your ETH. Well, the reality is that you can't really. You can only withdraw up to the amount that isn't being borrowed. So let's say you deposit 100 ETH and there's 70 ETH being borrowed by the lending market, by the collectivity of the users in the lending market. You will only be able to withdraw up to 30 ETH. Now, when you withdraw these 30 ETH, the borrow rate for the borrowers will spike up typically. And the point of this is to re-incentivize users to pay back their loan, to bring utilization down, so that then there's more spare ETH that you can withdraw. Now, what happens is that a lending market at scale typically tries to target having enough diversified collateral and a large enough TVL that any single user can effectively like withdraw their sum. But if the utilization rate is too high, the utilization rate is the ratio between the amount of assets of a specific token being borrowed on the lending market versus the total amount of that token being deposited on the protocol. If the utilization rate is too high, you can run into situations where you can't withdraw your funds. And during the bull market, this was a huge problem because I could say as a lending market, I'm going to put, if the utilization rate ever gets close to 100%, i.e. all the deposited assets are being borrowed, I will charge borrowers 30%, 40%, some huge interest rate. But during the bull market, if there was some Ponzinomic yield paying 1,000% somewhere else, guess what? That 30-40% borrow rates didn't seem too bad anymore. And this created a problem just for like the day-to-day operability of a protocol. So people started discussing whether there's a way to introduce dynamic interest rates that adjust to market conditions, and this was the second problem, which I like to think we're advancing very rapidly on and have a fully fledged roadmap for executing on. And so I came in and, like I said, for the first problem, which was for the risk assessment, I manned a team to build a simulator for the protocol that could basically take the user portfolio positions and effectively stress test them with a bunch of random market price activity. taken from historical data, generated randomly. Just stress test the users with all the kind of activity, with all random price activity, and see what happens. Do users get liquidated in a healthy way? Do users get liquidated in a really disordered way, leading to insolvencies? What is the probability of generating insolvencies? Obviously, as an overcollateralized lending market, you never want to see an insolvency. So it's really important to be able to have a clear idea. Where do insolvencies take place? How do we avoid insolvencies to take place? And yeah, so we published. I worked very closely with the DeFi research team at Polygon, where we co-authored the research paper, which you can find in the research section of ovix.com, 0vix.com. And where we just explain the framework that we use to optimize for protocol parameters, so such as liquidation loan to value ratio for assets and liquidation incentives. And then this whole simulator really kept on building on it, and it spun out into a bunch of other things. Most recently, we launched 24-hour liquidation probabilities on OVIX, so users can really get a sense for how likely are they to be liquidated. So up until a couple weeks ago, when we launched the 24-hour liquidation probabilities, the only real metric that users had on lending markets was their health factor. And I'm sure anybody who's used DeFi lending markets probably is aware of what their health factor is. But the problem with the health factor is that it's very misleading. And most importantly, often the health factor is not truly reflective of how risky your position is. Typically the health factor, just for the record, is a very simple. It's a number that's calculated by just doing the ratio between your liquidation loan to value ratio and your actual current loan to value ratio. So, if you're this kind of just very intuitively, when your loan to value ratio matches your liquidation loan to value ratio, your health factor becomes 1, and below that, your health factor is greater than 1. However, you can have portfolio positions that have a health factor very close to 1 that aren't really at risk of being liquidated. And conversely, you can have portfolio positions where the health factor is greater than 1, potentially even significantly greater than 1, and you're actually at a high risk of being liquidated. And so we really wanted to retire the health factor. I mean, it's kind of like a standard now in the industry, so we have it also, but we want to kind of move past it. And so instead, what we show is we thought about is what do users really care about? Users really care about how likely are they to be liquidated. The health factor just tells you how close you are to your maximal borrowing limit, which is it's somewhat connected to being liquidated, because if you reach your borrowing limit, you will get liquidated. Or more exactly, if you go the moment you go above your borrowing limit, you get liquidated. Oh, and for the record, just give the listeners an example of how the health factor can be misleading. Sorry, imagine a user that deposits a stablecoin, let's say USDC, on the platform, and they start. They borrow another stablecoin, USDT, or let's make it even more extreme. During the bull market, there were many cases where you'd have a lot of liquidity mining incentives to get users to use a protocol. So users would come and let's say deposit stables, let's say USDC, and borrow the same exact stable. So borrow more USDC, which they would redeposit, borrow more USDC, and they would create this iterative loop where at the end of the day you're effectively in a leveraged long position of USDC versus USDC. And in this case, you can loop up this position up to getting your health factor extremely low, but you're still effectively unliquidatable, because whatever happens to the price of USDC happens identically both on your borrow and your collateral side. So your health factor, so the USDC could in principle even depeg completely, and your health factor would remain exactly the same. Nothing would change. And so you wouldn't actually be liquidated. As opposed to a user that, let's say, deposits USDC and borrows, I don't know, Matic, for example, okay? And creates, borrows Matic, sells the Matic for USDC, deposits it on the lending market, borrows more Matic, and so effectively builds up a leveraged short position on Matic. Short because this kind of setup makes money if the Matic price goes down, and it loses money if the Matic price goes up. Now you can get to a situation where the health factor is 1.15, for example, implying just throwing a number out there, just like a number that is significantly greater than the number from the previous example. But then what could happen is that, Matic maybe has a 30% up price day, and this user will definitely get liquidated, whereas the other user will certainly not. And so the health factors can be extremely misleading. Users often want to ask us, well, is there a way to show us like where the prices of the assets need to be for me to get liquidated? And this is something that you could do if you're only like depositing one asset and borrowing another asset. But the moment you operate like complex portfolios in a lending market where you deposit multiple assets and borrow multiple other assets, you can't really do this in a practical way. But what you can do is tell the user, okay, let's blast. You set up your portfolio, and now let's blast all your assets with random price activity. Okay, let's just keep it simple, like taken from historical price data. And basically what I could do is I could run your portfolio through the entire history of price data, and I could tell you on how many days of the entire history of price data would you have seen enough sufficient volatility to liquidate your current portfolio position. And from that, you can effectively build a ratio and tell you in a probability, and I can tell you what that probability is. So if users now go on ovix.com or have positions on ovix.com, you can now see your liquidation probability risk, which we're now, by the way, starting to redesign to make it a little more user-friendly in terms of like giving users more feedback. Right now, you literally just see the number, the liquidation probability number. And if you don't stop and think about what that probability number means, it might actually be just as misleading as the health factor, if not more, because typically the liquidation probability is a small number. Like for example, like a reasonably risky position, but not uber risky position can have a liquidation probability of, let's say, 0.5%. And you see a 0.5% and you're like, well, that's nothing. I'm basically not, like, it's like I'm never going to get liquidated. It's super, super healthy. But users should really stop and reflect on what that number means. So what it means is that 0.5% means that, like, if I give you 1,000 days of random historical price activity, you would have got, your current portfolio would have gotten liquidated on roughly 5 of them. That's what 0.5% means. Put it another way, if you take the number you see on the screen, okay, and you do 100 divided that number, that gives you a rough estimate of how many days you'd have to wait on average to see a day with sufficient price volatility that your portfolio would get liquidated. So in the case of 0.5% liquidation probability, you do 100 divided 0.5, that gives you like 200, right? And so that would basically mean that if you currently have a portfolio with a 0.5% liquidation probability, on average, you will see a day that would liquidate you within the next 200 days. This is not obviously guaranteed because everything is random, but it gives you like an expected number of days that you would have to wait to see that kind of volatility. So in fact, and then at that point, users need to take, like an experienced user would need to take this data and kind of like put it in the context of how they use the lending market. Are you a user that checks your lending market position like every 2 hours, every 1 hour? Are you typically adjusting positions multiple times a day? Or are you a user that wants to deposit money on the protocol, set up a portfolio position, and then forget about it and come back 6 months later, right? Because if you're a user that checks your portfolio position, every multiple times a day, if you have a 0.5% liquidation probability, odds are that if any volatility happens, you're probably going to see it and react to it and adjust your portfolio position in time and not get liquidated. But if you're one of these users that like wants to deposit funds and not touch them for 6 months, then 0.5% liquidation probability is kind of dangerous, because 6 months is what, 180 days? Your chances of seeing volatility that liquidates your portfolio happen roughly within 200 days. You're kind of playing with fire, because you could be in a situation where you get liquidated and like the crazy volatility happens and you're not really paying attention to it, and you actually get liquidated. So we think that this metric is super important, and like I said, we're now in the process of doing user interviews and redesigning it to make it more meaningful and immediate for users to interact with. But this has been, I think, I mean, it is like a first in terms of a lending market product feature. And we think it's going to make for a safer environment for users in DeFi.
That's amazing. All right, well, everyone, if you can't already tell, Danielle is one of the most giga-brain people in all of the space. So I really want to encourage everybody listening in. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. Drop them in the chat. And yeah, Danielle, that was actually incredible how you just explained so much complex subjects in such a easy to understand way. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I guess like one thing we should talk about, we just went off about how the protocol works. How can people actually like start using it today? Like, let's talk about the VIX airdrop too. I see Frankie asking about that in the chat.
Yeah. So I mean, eventually we will the token will be will be launched. So the entire V-tokenomic is backend is completely built out. It actually has been for months, and the front end too. Like it's ready to go. The only thing holding us back right now, from my understanding, and this is coming from above my pay grade, is the bear market conditions. I think it's quote unquote management is assessing what the most opportune time for the token to be launched, but it's upcoming in the near future, and don't ask for dates. I don't have. Not that I don't want to tell you. I simply don't have them. As per the pre-mining launch. So we want to start obviously incentivize. We all agree internally that we need to incentivize our earliest users. The OVIX is technically still technically a public beta. It will be until the token gets launched. So we're bringing a lot of improvements to the protocol. Another one that, for example, is going to be launching in the this next coming week is the curved interest rate model, which we could talk more about if you want. And then down the road, we'll be making the interest rate model more dynamic and responsive to market conditions, like I said earlier. Effectively, we'd like to really value the input that we get from the users on the protocol, and we've been getting a lot of amazing feedback from our community. And so we launched these pre-mining incentives, which effectively will get unlocked the moment the token launches. And then when the moment the token launches, remember it's a V-tokenomic model. So what happens is that future issuance of the protocol token gets paid out depending on what markets your lending market in, what markets you're lending liquidity in, and what markets you're borrowing liquidity from. And then users with the VIX tokens will be able to vote on how to direct future liquidity mining incentives to the various markets, very similarly to the curve model. We expect this to kick off a very similar flywheel in terms of quote unquote bribes and incentives. When assets get listed on OVIX, then those protocols will be incentivized to effectively to boost the yield, to boost the liquidity in those markets. They'll have to somehow convince VIX token holders to vote for that market, and this typically creates a scenario for bribes and whatnot. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too. I think it creates a really interesting dynamic, the V-tokenomics model, and the bribing. One question I have regarding like the tokens listed on the platform, like what is the criteria for tokens to be listed on OVIX, and like how do new tokens get listed?
Okay, so right now, new tokens get listed through like executive partnerships and extreme due diligence by yours truly. So we launched a public beta with just the major blue chips. So on launch day, we had USDT, USDC, DAI, Wrapped ETH, Wrapped Bitcoin, and Matic. Since then, we've onboarded Matic X and Matic X and Mai. In the upcoming future, we plan to diversify the stablecoin offerings that we have. Most importantly, we'd like to onboard a euro stablecoin, and then slowly take it from there. Maybe also possibly also onboarding Lido STmatic to fully diversify the spectrum of staking opportunities for users on our platform. Now, how do we approach listing new assets? Well, like I said, first and foremost, we have to be able to determine what kind of protocol parameters ascribe to them. Again, the two major ones being liquidation loan to value ratio for that asset market, and the liquidation incentive. To be honest, liquidation incentives right now is the same across all asset markets. It's 10%. We will diversify that in the future, but it's not a high priority for us right now. In terms of setting the liquidation loan to value ratio, we effectively look at whether there is sufficient price history to model the volatility of that asset. Now, realistically, though, a lot of assets, especially the ones that we did onboard after launch, do not have that much of price history. These being Mai and Matic X. However, they present a on top, they present an extra complication, and that is that they are, I like to call them stable assets. I mean, with Mai, everybody would agree Mai is a stable coin. No, I don't think anybody would agree that Matic X is a stable coin. But I guess you could think of Matic X as being like somewhat stable versus Matic. In a sense, Matic X is effectively a token that's supposed to track Matic price with extra yield accumulated on top of it through the POS staking mechanism. So I like to think of it as a stable asset. You don't have to. It's not mandatory. You can do whatever you want. For the point is that for these assets that are in a sense pegged to another asset, you have to monitor depegging. You have to also assess depegging risks, and that's really, really hard to do because you can't really. There's no way to really quantify the probability of a stable asset depegging, a quote unquote stable asset. You can't really quantify the probability of a quote unquote stable asset depegging. You can't quantify how likely it is that the stable asset will depeg. You can't quantify how much it will depeg. If it does depeg. So effectively, price history is useless. Take an example, UST, the Terra stablecoin, which I'm sure our listeners have heard / experienced experience in. If you had looked at the price action of UST up to when the Terra ecosystem collapsed in May, you would say that the Terra stablecoin was very stable. It wasn't really volatile at all. It maybe fluctuated between 99.9 something cents of a dollar up to 1.00 something cents of a dollar. And you'd think, wow, this is a super stable coin. Until the day that it depegs, and then it depegs down. I think it went initially down to 70 cents, then back up to 90, and then it crashed down to oblivion. That is what people like to call an extreme event, a tail event, a black swan, if you will. You can't predict when it happens. You can't predict the magnitude of the black swan event, and so there you need to have a completely different approach to how you assess risks of these assets. And I and my team chose to take a more first principles approach. And that is to basically monitor the available liquidity in the ecosystem. So ultimately, as a lending market, to guarantee the stability of the lending market and the solvency of the lending market, really only one thing matters, and that is that if you, as a user, are liable or are liquidatable, that you will get liquidated with a healthy slippage, worst case scenario, such that A, liquidators are incentivized to liquidate you, and B, when they do liquidate you and take their fees in the process, you're actually left with a position that is healthier than the one from before you got liquidated. And for this, this is really just a game of liquidity. I mean, if you're holding $1 million position of some asset, and there's only $500,000 in liquidity to liquidate that asset. In other words, take that asset from you, dump it, then in this specific example, these specific numbers that I cooked up, no liquidator would actually try to liquidate you because you would basically drain the entire market. But think of it as an extreme example of this liquidity would be so great that you would actually end up having a more toxic portfolio position post liquidation. And this is what ultimately needs to be avoided. And for this, what we do is we effectively monitor how assets are being lent and borrowed across all the lending markets in the Polygon ecosystem. And from that, we can kind of estimate, in the case of a liquidation cascade, how much of any given asset will need to be dumped, like literally market sold, to liquidate those users. And once you have that number, you can ask yourself, is there enough liquidity to absorb that kind of market sell? Now, liquidators typically use all sorts of liquidity to liquidate you. Maybe they have a Binance account and they'll just market sell on a centralized exchange, or maybe they're just using on-chain liquidity. Now, obviously, we don't have any control on the liquidity on centralized exchanges, but liquidity that's on-chain is transparent and visible by everybody. And so what we do is we take the worst case scenario. Let's assume that a liquidator can only use on-chain liquidity, because that effectively can't be spoofed. That's just there. You can monitor it block by block. And then we can ask ourselves, does on-chain liquidity have enough volume, enough size to absorb a liquidation cascade a market sell resulting from a liquidation cascade targeting a specific asset. And based effectively on the ratio of these two numbers, we can compute what we call a toxicity index. And this is a number which we attribute to every specific asset in our market. And right now we've been monitoring them internally. Pretty soon we'll be posting them on OVIX. We're in the process of putting together a risk assessment dashboard that is tailored specifically to OVIX. And yeah, like users will be able to see the toxicity numbers for the assets on our protocol. And then in the future, and this is currently being worked on, it's also being built as a separate pipeline in our roadmap. And this is exactly the tool that we're going to need to make borrow rate curves dynamic. Effectively, the borrow rate curves of the borrow rate that a specific user pays on the platform will effectively be a function of the utilization of the market, some other parameters, and most importantly also the toxicity of the assets that user brings to the protocol as collateral.
Wow. Okay. And like while we're on the topic of this dynamic like interest rate curve, could you explain, like you mentioned something about a static interest rate before? Like what is that, and like what are the cons of that?
Yeah, can I share a screen?
Absolutely.
Actually, no, before I share a screen, I'm going to give a little premise and then I'll share the screen. Wait, let me. Okay, no, I'll share the screen, and I hope it won't be too confusing for users. Can y'all see my screen?
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Awesome.
Make sure to click on the screen, and don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any. I do know there's some in the chat we'll get to shortly.
All right. So, there's a lot happening on this figure, so I'm going to go bit by bit and slowly build up the information. Okay. So, first and foremost, the axes of this figure. Okay. On the bottom, on the x-axis, you have the utilization rate. Think of this as I mentioned before. It's the ratio between assets being borrowed from a specific market versus assets being supplied to that market. This number is always going to be a number less than 1, this ratio at least. And here it's turned into a percentage, so that number is mapped to between 0 and 100. 100% would mean that all the assets being lent of a specific token are being borrowed by users, and 0% would mean that none of the tokens being deposited on the protocol are being borrowed by users. Okay. The y-axis is just the borrow rate APY. In other words, if you were to borrow the assets, what kind of borrow rate are you expected to pay? Okay. Now, if this is clear, I want you to focus on the blue curve. Does everybody see the blue curve?
Yeah.
Right. So the blue curve is called the jump rate model. And this is how borrow rates are calculated on basically every single lending market in crypto across all the chains. All right. It's basically just a straight line that goes that has a constant slope up to some utilization rate, which is typically 80%. For the vast majority of markets, it's 80%, which is often called the optimal utilization rate, because it leaves, like, ideally you'd want users, you don't want users to be borrowing significantly more than 80%, just because you want to leave yourself a 20% buffer so that if anybody wants to withdraw funds, they can easily withdraw funds. It's just meant for usability, not because it breaks anything if you go above 80%. And then beyond the optimal utilization rate, the borrow rate increases linearly again, but with a much higher slope. Okay, and the point is that once users start borrowing more than 80% of the tokens in a specific market, the borrow rate increases more rapidly, such that it should disincentivize users from borrowing, and instead it should incentivize them to paying back their loan, and then that will bring the borrow rate back down, and ideally you live at 80%. That's where protocols want to live. However, this creates a problem. The fact that the blue curve just like suddenly goes from one slope to another so abruptly means that if the utilization fluctuates around 80%, in other words, you're close to optimal utilization, but you have so many users that some are withdrawing funds and simultaneously people are deploying funds. So the utilization really, like, kind of depending on how users are using your platform, the utilization rate kind of like fluctuates between above 80%, below 80%, above 80%, below 80%. What happens is that the jump rate, the borrow rate actually becomes is maximally volatile. In other words, if you had the same kind of fluctuation in utilization rate, let's say around 60%, the borrow rate would fluctuate significantly less than if you were at 80%. Okay, and this is kind of like not it's kind of counterproductive, because you're targeting an 80% optimal utilization rate, but at the same time, like, if the protocol starts stagnating there, you actually have, like, you can have high volatility in the borrow rate when this takes place. So what we're introducing is a curved borrow rate model, and that's the orange curve. Okay, which it doesn't really change it doesn't really change much from a utilization perspective, but what it does do is, after all, like, for a large band of utilization rates up to roughly 70%, the curved model matches almost exactly, not exactly, it's a little bit off, but like you'd have to look at decimal points. It basically tracks the jump rate model, but then when you start getting around above 70% utilization rate, the borrow rate curve starts increasing a little more gradually and more smoothly, thus meaning that if you have users utilizing your platform at 80% utilization, and there's fluctuations in that utilization rate, the volatility in the borrow rate is actually dampened. That said, if people start borrowing more than 80%, the borrow rate still spikes up, and at 100% it matches the jump rate model. And so the vertical dashed lines are the utilization rates of the markets on OVIX. I made this plot yesterday, so these numbers might be a little different, but they wouldn't be different. I wouldn't expect them to be too different today. What you have here is, in orange, is the utilization rate for wrapped Bitcoin. This light blue line is Matic X. Black dashed lines are ETH. Purple is Matic. Red is and yellow is DAI. And so what you can see is, from this figure, you can kind of see what's going to happen to the borrow rates of users once we switch interest rate models. Here on the lower end, nothing really changes between from Wrap Bitcoin, Matic X, Ethereum, and Matic. They're going to have borrow rates, which, I mean, if we were to switch this on today across all markets and you were borrowing some of these assets, you wouldn't really notice it unless we told you. Start seeing a little bit of a change. DAI is actually in a funny situation. DAI is actually like further down the line. It's above 80% utilization rate, but it just by coincidence yesterday it was lying really close to the point where the curved interest rate model and the jump rate model intersect. So it's funnily enough, if we were to turn this on for DAI, even DAI users probably wouldn't notice that we turned on the model. What you would see is you would start seeing a difference near 80%, but again, we're not talking much. Like at 80%, if the jump rate model quoted you a 10.5%, roughly 10% borrow rate APY, the new curved model is going to quote you 11.5%. But then as you go above 80%, it actually climbs, the borrow rate actually climbs a little more slowly than the jump rate model, and then kind of picks up at the end. So around let's say 90% utilization, the curved model would quote you 17.8% interest rate, whereas the jump rate model would quote you 23.4. So that actually kind of that should actually this jump rate, our curve model should actually kind of incentivize like an exploration of utilization rates above 80% up to maybe 90, depending on the market. Although we're not particularly worried right now because in the middle of a bear market, there aren't too many incentives to pay really high borrow rates for many assets. And this is the curved interest rate model, and in the future, this curved interest rate model which actually depends on a couple parameters. The parameters that it depends on will actually become dynamic. In other words, they will depend on dynamic properties of dynamic on-chain quantities. One of which I mentioned earlier will be the toxicity numbers.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for explaining that so well. So I want to get to Frankie's question now. Frankie was wondering about, well, their question word for word is, can you bundle stablecoin together? So I think like what they're asking is kind of how like your position would work on the OVX platform.
You mean, okay, so I mean, bundling them on the collateral side doesn't really make sense. I could see not that I could see, like I do see a reason for bundling them on the borrow side. So as a matter of principle, if you are, let's say, in a speculative long position, a crypto long position, so let's say you're bullish on ETHUSD, right? And you want to play that with leverage. What you would do, you would come to a lending market, you deposit your Ethereum as collateral, you would borrow stablecoins of your choosing, you would swap these stablecoins out for Ethereum, deposit them on the lending market and borrow more stablecoins and continue up until you get to some leverage that you feel comfortable with. Because you don't want to take it all the way to the max and then risk being liquidated. Typically users just like pick a stablecoin to borrow. But the reality is, and this is like, here's an alpha hack for those that don't know this. For those that do, I apologize if I offend your intelligence. What you should really be doing is you should be borrowing all the stablecoins. Like you should spread out your borrows across all the stablecoins. Because think about it, if one of the stablecoins was to like depeg for whatever reason, okay, the reason doesn't matter, right? You want to have your loan in that stablecoin because it gives you an opportunity to potentially pay back your loan with less money, right? And this is just free money. So effectively, I mean, like this, like you don't contemplate this because you're effectively just like a speculative long position. Your general thesis just depends on there being a stable coin to use, right? But for zero risk, you can speculate. For zero additional risk, you can speculate on a stable coin depegging. Right, and so it's actually in your interest, even though the chances of this are extremely small, and that the chances that it happens when you have a position on are small. It's like the benefit you get, given that you get the benefit for zero additional risk. It's actually in your interest to take that, to make that play. And so, if anything, what could be cool is to introduce an option to borrow like bundled stables. So you basically like, you have to have like a button where it's just like, like borrow, X amount of dollars worth of stables, and the protocol automatically kind of like this one click function effectively like figures out like how to borrow to like, while still like minimizing your bar, like the bar rate that you end up paying.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's like good to highlight how OVIX works differently from like a platform like Qidao, in the sense that on Qidao you would have like an isolated vault. You deposit a asset and borrow against it, whereas like on OVIX you can borrow, like you said, like a mix of stable coins, or different cryptos, like or you could also supply a mix of collateral too. Like you're not
Right.
in a isolated position, it's like an account wide position kind of thing.
Yeah. So in a sense, so effectively, on OVIX, all the funds are effectively mixed in together. In other words, you deposit a collateral and you can borrow any of the assets on our platform with their respective, borrow rate. This is, by the way, the reason why we're very slow on onboarding new assets, because whenever we onboard an asset, we have to think how it interplays with other assets that are currently on the platform. But whereas on Qidao, yeah, you called it borrowing, although I guess technically it's minting, because you're effectively just like locking up funds as collateral to mint new MI tokens. And then those tokens, those assets of yours that are locked, aren't really being used for anything.
This is an interesting question by Tiki. They're wondering about like a swap function for supplied assets.
Yeah. Okay, great. This is a great question. If I have to be completely honest with you, I have been nagging our devs about this since I first joined OVIX. So the way it's done on other lending markets is that they're big enough that there is actually a liquid market for their O tokens. In other words, think of it like your receipt tokens. Like when you, for example, take Aave or OVIX, when you deposit funds on OVIX, let's say you deposit USDC on OVIX, you actually mint OUSDC tokens, right? Which in turn represent your position on OVIX. And whenever you want to withdraw funds, you effectively burn these OUSDC tokens to get to basically withdraw your base tokens out again, your USDC out again, right? Now these O tokens are transferable tokens. So they're tokens by all means, right? And if there's a market for these O tokens, it makes swaps very easy. So in principle, just like there's like an ETH USDC pool on Polygon, on QuickSwap, for example, what you could do is you could set up a pool for OUSDC and OETH. And what this would mean is that if you deposit USDC on OVIX, you would be able to then go to this pool and swap your OUSDC for OETH without touching OVIX, by the way, right? And then once the swap completes on OVIX, you would see that you actually have ETH deposited as collateral versus having USDC deposited as collateral. So to do this though, it requires like enough liquidity to really kickstart this market and make it efficient. In principle, any of our users could do this. Like you could literally go on QuickSwap and you could set up a pool for OVIX O tokens, and then if you guys like work hard and bring enough liquidity to these pools, then the swaps become you get the feature that you want. Like it's a feature that the community can build without us intervening. By the way, like it doesn't depend on us. Like the users listening, go out and make it happen. Like it's nothing is really stopping you. Now, if there isn't enough liquidity, then the only other way of doing this swap function is to basically use flash loans, and it's doable. It's basically, let's say you want to swap USDC, your staked USDC for staked ETH, not staked, sorry, your deposited USDC for deposited ETH. Then what you could do is you could do an ETH flash loan. Imagine like a big single transaction that begins with ETH flash loan. Deposit ETH as collateral on OVIX. Withdraw USDC that you had previously as collateral on OVIX, swap for ETH, repay flash loan, right? And this would be the operation. And this is something that we want to do. It's on our ticket backlog. We haven't given it. We have other things that have taken higher priority. But yeah, it's super interesting. But like I said, our TVL is growing. I think we still are the fastest growing lending market on Polygon. Users, like, don't let protocol slow you down. Go make it happen. Take your O token liquidity and set up pools on QuickSwap. You'll even earn transaction fees, just so you know, right? Because if you let's say you're a user that has USDC and ETH on OVIX, you could set up a pool for O tokens on QuickSwap, and if any other user wants to swap their O USDC tokens for O ETH tokens, they'll do it with your liquidity and they'll pay you a fee for it. So nothing's stopping you.
That's super cool. Yeah, I can think of tons of exciting potential applications for these O tokens. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. We are getting a little like close to time, but I mean, I love talking to you, Danielle. So if you want to go over the time, that's totally okay with me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one question I did have though that like I think is really important. Earlier, like at the start of this session, you mentioned that you guys are focused solely on Polygon. Like I'm curious, why did you make that decision, and like how do you feel about that decision now?
Right. So we still feel great about the decision. The decision was made before I joined in. I agree with the decision. I was adopted into the decision, and I agree with the decision. And I like to think that we're still very happy about the decision. And the reason for it is that the Polygon ecosystem is just so vibrant. There's just so much to do, so much happening. The business development from the Polygon heads is flawless. I mean, we've been seeing partnerships after partnerships after partnerships being announced. It's impressive. Like I was literally talking with my research analyst today, and we're just wondering like how many more partnerships can they possibly announce? It's like how many? Like, it feels like they've announced every possible partnership in existence. You know, like Meta, Robinhood, Nubank. You know, it's like and big names, really big names. So now tying it back into us, like I said, our founders come from a fintech background, right? So within our strategic roadmap, we obviously have a very focused eye on onboarding institutional players. And for this, we're convinced that within the EVM space, Polygon is the place to be because of the partnerships, because of the pioneering zkVM work that's now in testnet. And by the way, OVIX is live on Polygon zkVM testnet. But also because of supernets. Supernets effectively create this like very awesome, fertile playground for institutional players to dip their fingers into the blockchain, right? And then blockchain inspired products. And whether they do integrate or not with a Polygon, with a wider Polygon ecosystem later on, what is true is that if they do, they can do it with a flip of a switch effectively. Like the bridging funds will be very straightforward. And and I guess the next thing will be to sit back and watch what Polygon's directives are for, how's the Matic token going to evolve in this new, more complex ecosystem of POS, zkVM, and supernets.
There's definitely tons to be excited about for the future, and I don't know, it feels like everything's just happening so fast. Like so much has happened this past year. It's insane keeping up with everything. I do want to make sure that we like cover everything that you wanted to cover today, Danielle. So if there's any like topics that you wanted to touch on that we haven't already, like,
I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think so too. Like this was a very comprehensive AMA all around. If anyone else has any questions, make sure to drop them in the chat. But yeah, this has been phenomenal.
Yeah, if there's one more question, let's do one more question. If not, let's wrap it up.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I personally like don't have any other questions. Like I'm going through my list of questions. I feel like you covered everything. Like we talked about what's in store for the future, what you're most excited about. You talked about so much on the like research side, and you gave us a good amount of alpha too. Like yeah, this is honestly like one of the most comprehensive AMAs ever. So
Well, it's my pleasure then.
yeah. Oh, one thing I guess that's really important. Okay. For people that want to go try out OVX, there is about like 24 hours left on their Reddit avatar contest. So there's like a little giveaway going on. You try out OVX, you fill out this like form, and you can get entered into a draw for these Reddit collectible avatars, I believe. And also, I believe OVX has a ambassador program going on that, well, it's been going on for a while and applications were closed, but they just recently reopened. So there's a really good opportunity to get involved with the OVX Chad's ambassador program.
Yep.
And beyond that, like, where is the best places to get in contact with you, Danielle, and keep up to date with OVX and get involved?
I mean, you can find me on the OVX Discord, and I'm Pesto Papa on Twitter. Papa spelled Poppa. Like I like it when you call me Big Papa.
Awesome. Okay, I just dropped your Twitter in the text channel, and I'll bump all the links again. I got them all here. So we got the website, Twitter, Telegram, Discord, as well as the YouTube channel. There's some good videos on there, so make sure to go subscribe and follow them on Twitter, join the Discord, Telegram, get involved. Yeah, and with that said, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in today. Really grateful to have had you joining us, Danielle. This has been amazing. So
Pleasure's all mine. Have a good day, everybody. Bye bye.
bye, everyone.